Good afternoon. So with the National Assembly meeting tomorrow, various political parties due to announce this afternoon whether they'll join a government of national unity or not. This may be an important moment to work out what kind of society we actually want. I think if you had to ask 100 people, what do you want? You might get 100 different answers back, except I think we also all want the same two things. We want a better life for ourselves and a better life for our children. And for everyone else's children. Edwin Naidu is the Director at Higher Education Media. Edwin, good afternoon to you. So you've been looking at this question, you've been holding seminars about it. What kind of democracy do we want? What kind of answers have you been getting back when you ask people that question?
Well, I think, when you're talking about this, you have to go back to Nelson Mandela and when he bid farewell to Parliament on 10th of March in 2004, he urged South Africans to never forget the past, but to use it as a guide in overcoming the challenges facing the future. So, he said South Africans should never give up on the belief in goodness. So I think, when we're talking about the future, we're looking at what shaped us, what moved us to where we are. And, we've been talking 30 years of democracy this year. And, the future is about overcoming the past, but not blaming the past, but eradicating ills, problems relating to poverty, crime, daily living. And, we talk about change. The idea is ingrained in society, but it's how we do it. And, elections gives us a perfect opportunity to look at what we want. And, there's several critical issues: governance, service delivery, commitment to the Constitution, and above all, politicians being in touch and in tune with citizens, especially after 30 years of democracy experience.
I mean, part of it, there's certain things I think we all want as South Africans to be heard. We want to be able to speak, and we do speak, but we want to be heard. Do you think our system allows that, to maybe force politicians to listen?
Well, I think the system doesn't allow it, directly, but indirectly it does, because we vote our politicians into office. And definitely, when you're talking about what type of government would get us to there, it's a government that listens to its people, that's in touch with the mood of the country, and one that shows empathy, not only during elections, but is cognizant of our challenges as citizens regarding our daily living, the battle against crime or load shedding, rising costs of living, transport, fuel. The list is long, but what we've seen is empathy is lacking. And one can say, what lessons can we take from 30 years of democracy to build a future we want? And probably the biggest lessons hark back to what brought us here. 30 years ago, we were talking about people's forums. We were talking about the fight against apartheid, how it galvanized people. And what's happened over the last decade and a half or so is the voice of people have been forgotten, marginalized, ignored to a degree. And I think what you saw with 2024 election results is people have spoken out against all political parties when you consider that only 16 million out of 27 million registered voters exercised their right to vote. So yes, people have spoken in their silence, I would say, and it's important to heed that message that was so clear.
One of the things that we've seen is people will talk about, and you see this to an extent in our election results maybe, is that people talk about sort of freedom, rights, looking after other people, the empathy that you speak of. And they also talk about a better life for themselves. So people want a real crackdown on crime. People are frustrated that they are unemployed, and they take that out on migrants, for example. And sometimes you hear people saying, I don't really care whether we have a constitution or not. All I want is a job. All I want is for me to turn the tap on and for water to come out of it, clean drinking water. I want to know that my children will be, in class, teachers will be there on time teaching for 7 hours a day, things like that. Do you worry a little bit about that people are so frustrated, there's another word for it, but so frustrated that actually, in a way, some of what the Constitution gives us, they'll almost do away with just to get proper sort of service?
I think I worry about the fact that we've become very insular in a sense, that we focused on ourselves rather than the beyond. Having visited a few countries in Africa in the last few years, there was so much of goodwill towards South Africa. The African continent opened its doors to Africa or to South Africa. And what you're seeing, when you've seen the horrible xenophobia that we've seen in the past few years in South Africa towards treatment of people, it's not on, and that is a worry. But I think you're almost in a catch-22 situation, because people's struggles are for their daily living, transport costs, or keeping the lights on, or putting food on the table. So how do you measure that? And yes, we have the best constitution in the world on paper, but in reality, it's delivery that's really lacking. So that is a concern. So, through conversations that we've been host or planning to host and take through universities throughout South Africa, Higher Education Media Services wants to try and get people talking about what would make us better as a nation, what would make us win, what would work for us. And, the key things you spoke about: security, food, transport, lights, all these basic things, but also it's humanity. And I think when you go back to what Nelson Mandela said, it's never lose that sense of humanity that we have, not just because we are South Africans, but because we're Africans. We all belong to the same continent, and we're here to make sure that we're all on a journey. Because when you're talking about the future of South Africa, you also talk about the future Africa. We all need to lift ourselves out of the narrative that we're a basket case, but we need to find ways to say, how do we do it together? And the key thing in a conversation is letting our leaders know what the expectations are we have of them. So I think, it's a catch-22. It's about me first, and we've seen the me first propagated by leaders in the past, with corruption, for example, betterment of themselves and friends or families. And that is a concern. And those are the things you want to say no to in building and creating a South Africa that we really want, and a South Africa that really speaks to and is in tune with everybody.
There are two ways of looking at these election results. On the one side, you can look, as you have, at the percentage of people who did not vote and think that's a frustration, a failure of democracy. Maybe it is. On the other hand, the fact that we've seen the governing party lose so much of the vote, that we've seen so much change in our politics, might also show, and might also be the beginning of a kind of re-excitement of our democracy. And as our democracy becomes more competitive, your vote, everyone's vote, should become more powerful. I mean, people are going to need to fight for your vote. Whereas in the past, if there was one dominant party, maybe that wasn't the case. So is there the potential here to get people excited about our democracy again, because the government can change, is the point?
Exactly. No, I really believe exactly what you said, because if you think about it, there was a sense of arrogance thinking that the ANC, in fact, you've heard ANC was going to lead until Jesus comes, as a snide remark. But the reality is, we've seen this was a shocker of a result. Yes, it may have been expected, but I think it's still a shock, and it shows that you cannot take people for granted. You cannot take the will of the people for granted. Delivery, meeting the people's needs are real. South Africans, and I think it gives us power. It gives us a sense of, yes, we can make a difference. The one thing I must share with you, I spoke to a few youth during the elections, and some of them were saying that they're not going to vote because it's not going to make a difference. And the irony is, you had 11 million youth that registered to take part, and in pockets of places, the number of youth that turned out to vote was between 5 and 9%. So it actually shows that we've got work to do over the next 5 years before the next election to actually show that your vote matters. People fought for your democracy, gave their lives, made huge sacrifices, and democracy can make a difference. And I think that's the belief we got from what we've seen in 2024 election results.
Thank you very much indeed. Edwin Naidu is the Director of Higher Education Media. It's a very interesting question. What do you want from our democracy?